Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome back to where we left off in class, which is us getting into the late Middle Ages, right? But of course, last class we got to talk about one of my favorite things to bring up, a very all-important document that changed the world and gives you your rights, sets up the British Parliament, gives you the right to a fair trial, etc., etc., etc. It's known as the Magna Carta.
Yeah! Yeah!
Exactly. It's super important. You can't understand how much the Magna Carta...
Yeah!
Sorry about that one. So the big thing about it is, though, is that document is very all-important. It's going to kind of lead to the establishment of constitutions and democratic systems in Europe leading forward, right? So it kind of sets the tone for constitutional systems and legislative bodies and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. We are moving now into what's known as the late Middle Ages, right? And the late Middle Ages is defined by stuff like this that you see on your screen right here. Things like wars and famine and disease and like low economics and things like that. Well, only for a little while, because after the fact it's going to skyrocket. But we're not going to get into that right now. So if you're looking at this like family tree right here, you do not have to draw this. Some people like to just so they can understand it better or whatever. But the big thing about it is you have to understand that this right here is going to be the old dynasty of the French, and then this is going to be the new one, right? So we're getting into another war caused by what's known as a Secession Crisis, right? And a Secession Crisis is S-U-C-C-E-S-S-I-O-N, is when someone does not have inheritance to the throne, or there is no heir to the throne, right? Well, the thing about it is in France, they had a series of several successful kings, ending up with people like Philip III and Philip IV. The big thing about it, though, is Philip III and Philip IV are from this family known as the Capetian dynasty, right? C-A-P-E-T-I-A-N. So early on, one of Philip III's descendants married a man named Charles of Valois, right? Bringing in then this noble family as very, very close cousins, right? Now, the thing about it is Philip III is going to die and Philip IV is going to take over. Philip IV had three sons, right? Louis X, Philip V, Charles IV, right? Now, the unfortunate thing that happens is that none of these young men have sons or heirs to the throne. But there's an interesting little dynamic that does happen. Isabella Capetian, who is actually from the Capetian dynasty, who got married off to the King of England, Edward II, did have a son. She had a son named Edward III. So it's like, hey, wait a minute. He's the closest living male relative. Why doesn't he inherit the throne? Well, the problem that arose is this thing in France known as Salic Law, right? Write that down. S-A-L-I-C Law, and then underline it, right? Salic Law denotes the fact that a man cannot inherit the throne through a woman, right? So, like, that's a law on the books in France, right? So this leads to a secession crisis because who's supposed to inherit the throne? Edward III or Philip VI, right? Well, the thing about it is the 100 Years' War is going to break out because of this issue and this conflict, right? Edward III right here is the upcoming King of England, right? So the French nobles do not want him to take over, right? You don't want the King of England to become the King of France because that would then unite the two things into one conglomerated country or body, and then basically, in a nutshell, you would have an English king who speaks English and has English customs being on the throne of France. Now, some of you are like, well, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, didn't a French guy take over the throne of England at one point? William of Normandy did do that. He actually did inherit the throne of, like, England at one point after he took it over the Battle of Hastings, 1066. Now, the big thing, though, is also what you need to understand, is that this is going to get very muddled, though, right? Philip VI is going to be the guy from France that ends up taking over due to the fact that he actually is living in France, from France, and technically, due to Salic Law, he is the one entitled to it because he's not inheriting it through a woman, right? So, big thing that ends up happening is a war, though, that goes down from 1347 to 1453. It's a very defining war, an all-defining war of this entire era being of the Middle Ages. Now, and a good way to remember it is Philip is from France and Edward is from England, right? So it's a little phonetic help, right? Get you going. Now the thing about it is Philip VI does take the throne, even though technically, like, Edward feels that he is entitled to it, right? So Philip VI takes the throne after the death of his cousin Charles, right? Charles the 10th, and then Edward feels that he should get control of France, though, since he owns land there. So you see this little green area right down here, if I can ever zoom in on it. This right here is an area known as Aquitaine, right? Aquitaine was held by Edward's family and the throne of England, right? That land belonged to them as a noble state of that kingdom of France, right? Now, the thing about it also is he's like, not only do I own land in France, but I'm related to the last king by blood. He's my uncle. You're not even like an uncle-nephew situation. You're a cousin. Like, I'm the one that should be getting this throne. Well, then Philip pisses off Edward even more when he says, hey, when you're in England, when you're in France, you're one of my subjects, right? So Philip VI basically said to Edward III of England, you come here, you take a knee before me, and you tell me that I am your king while you are in France, right? Edward refuses to do it, and so Philip says, all right, fine, you want to play that game? And he strips the land away from Edward in France, right? Takes it over. This leads to a war that is going to be absolutely bananas and is going to be defined by like 5 key things, right? So the important details about the 100 Years' War are the fact that, one, it's not even technically 100 years, 116 years, right? 1347 to 1453, right? Now, also, another big thing about the 100 Years' War that you need to know is that there actually was not as much war as you would think that there would be, right? There was a lot of peacetime between it, right? So, like, now, some people are like, well, why don't you just call it different wars every time? Well, look, put your hand down, Marissa. I understand that you're getting all piped up and stuff like that, but it makes it a little bit more sense. It makes it more easy if we're kind of looking at the installments of, like, whoever's coming onto the throne and da-da-da-da-da during these times of, like, battles and stuff. What, you want to get out? Huh? You want to get out? Well, come here. But you have to sit in my lap, okay? Like, so, like, you have to actually sit with me and not freak out and try to, like, run away and then, like, try to eat everything, okay? So, hello. And speaking of French, Pierre. Hello, Pierre. Now, so the big thing about it, though, is that there were only 9 really big battles in this entire war over a 100-year-long span. Some of these battles include things like the Battle of Agincourt, the Battle of Cercy, the Battle of Poitiers, right? A lot of different, like, major conflicts between the French and between the English for the control of the French throne, right? Now, also, another big thing, though, is you're going to see major weapons make their debut, right? Now, 2 of those weapons, or excuse me, 1 of those weapons is this one right here. Okay, so what you need to do underneath that major weapons thing, write these weapons down, okay? The English longbow versus the French crossbow, Pierre. Now, what you need to understand is, oh, thank you, is that the French came into this war using this device, right? The crossbow. Now, the thing about the crossbow is it's large, it's heavy, it's bulky, and it has to be reloaded over a very, very, very long period of time, right? You see this little crank device in the back? That's actually how you reloaded your crossbow, right? Now, the crossbow is not nearly as accurate. The arrows don't fly nearly as far. They do not have armor-piercing capabilities. And then also, if you lose this crank, this thing is now just a glorified club. Now, fun fact, too, crossbows don't even fire arrows. They fire these things known as bolts, which are shorter arrows that are meant for, like, close, in-your-face kind of, like, conflicts, right? Or, like, battles. Now, then, though, the English started using these in this war. The English longbow. And the English longbow is dramatically different, where you can actually, if Pierre will help me demonstrate, you sit there and you pull the whole thing back, right? And then you launch it into the air, okay? So the thing about it, though, is English longbowmen are accurate up to 300 yards. And there were several hundred of them. They could rain arrows down onto their enemies, right? There's actually this one famous general from this entire war named Edward the Black Prince. And he was known that because he wore all black armor. And 80% of his army was made up of English longbowmen, right? Because, like, what are you going to do? Nothing. And they would just, like, rain down arrows on top of the French, leading to a lot of French losses, right? Now, another major weapon, though, at the end of the war that makes its debut is gunpowder weapons, right? You're going to see cannons and the very first guns make their debut during this war, Pierre. It's a very important thing. They actually adopted black powder technology from the Chinese because international trade is beginning to grow in the late Middle Ages. And the French are going to start using siege cannons and things like that, and also, like, these, like, breech-loading, like, guns. Like, that's the first gun right there. How ugly is that? So this is the very first war that, like, guns were used, right? And so gunpowder weapons becomes another major thing. So the other big thing that you need to know is that for most of this war, England was crushing France, right? There was at one point where they literally did crown another, like, a king of France was the king of England, right? His name was Henry the Fourth. No, not Henry the Fourth. Henry the Sixth. Problem was he was only like 4 months old, right? So the thing about it, though, is that they were absolutely killing France for most of this war. One famous battle, known as the Battle of Agincourt, literally was decided by these English longbowmen because, like, apparently the French soldiers showed up that morning and didn't know that it had rained the day before, and they charged the cavalry over an open field, and their soldiers got stuck in in the mud and like couldn't get out and were like drowning in it, and the English longbow just lit them up, right? So like that was under the reign of Henry V, though. So the big thing though is that England was winning most of this war, and also another weird thing is that the alliances are like very, 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 very messy, right? And now why I say that they're very, very messy is due to the fact that yes, the war did break out from 1337, was fought on and off again until 1453. France is going to win after aligning with people that reside on the same island as Great Britain, right? So, or as England. So here's the weird thing. The French are going to align with the Scots, right? And Scotland is in northern, like on the Isle of Great Britain and in the north, right? Now they're not united with England at this point. So the Scots also hate the English due to a lot of things from the Middle Ages when Edward Longshanks took them over, right, during the Scottish War for Independence. Now, the big thing, though, is that France is going to win after aligning with Scotland and reconciling with their wealthy region of Burgundy. So Burgundy's the other reason why this is like a very messy war, right? So when you're looking at the progression of the 100 Years' War in these maps right here, look how England started out with just the green, then expanded to all this green, then took over all of northern France. Now, really quickly, notice this light-colored area right here, right? The Duchy of Burgundy, the County of Burgundy, and this area known as Flanders, which is actually modern-day the Netherlands, right? So those light green areas are French people that allied with the English due to economic reasons, right? So basically, France was fighting this war against... Mama, I'll call you later. All right, so now look. France was fighting this war against England and against other French people, right? So in France, it was like half of a civil war, right? But that was the region of Burgundy. And they were a very wealthy region that allied with England, mainly over textile production, right? And mainly over like wool and stuff like that, because they wanted to make a lot of money. And the Burgundy region is also where we get the color burgundy due to the like actual wine, like the color of the wine that they make. Now, so like looking forward though, France is going to end up winning after reconciling with Burgundy, but also because the French were inspired by a very influential figure. That figure being a woman by the name of Joan of Arc, right? Yes, a woman is going to turn the tides of this war, and this woman has 3 times as many books written about her than any man from the Middle Ages, right? Joan of Arc enters the scene when she's about 16 years old, right? Give or take. Now, just so you know, though, she comes from very humble beginnings, right? Very, very humble beginnings, and then eventually becomes what's known as the patron saint of France, right? So Joan of Arc actually apparently really had a very, very poor upbringing early on, right? She was born to a very, very poor peasant family inside of a very small village in France, and honestly, we do think that they were allied mainly with the French rather than actually like the English and the Burgundians at this time. But at the age of 13, she had gone through a lot of stuff, right? First of all, she apparently was bullied a lot when she was a kid for how religious she was, right? Kids would pick on her because apparently she would go to church like 4 to 5 times a day to pray or to confess or to go to reconciliation, and apparently kids would mess with her about it, right? But then one day when she was 13 years old, she apparently was working in the garden, right? Was working in her like family's garden and was actually like tilling the land, right? Was tilling the land and was actually looking to try and plant some things, and then she heard this voice out of nowhere go, "Joan," and she was like, "What the heck was that?" And then like she like turned, and apparently the church was glowing in a golden color, right? And she began to hear the voice of, not from God, but from saints and martyrs, right? Now, that's why actually Joan of Arc Church in Laplace, right? Joan of Arc Church in Laplace is a golden outside color because of that, and the interior of the church has these really, really big gold panels to try and actually show like the whole, like the color of the golden like lights, rays of light that emerged that Joan saw when she actually heard the voices of God. So it's pretty cool that like a place like right down the road actually has like symbols of this story, right? So she saw the church glowing, and the church, like the voices of these saints started telling her, like, you need to be even more Christian, you need to remain chaste. And so what she does is at the age of 13, she takes a vow of chastity, right? And Pierre, just so you know, chastity means she's never going to get married, right? And she's going to devote herself to religious life, okay? Those are her holy orders. That's what she decided to take. And even at one point, Pierre, her dad tried to have an arranged marriage with her, right? And he didn't try to marry her, but he tried to marry her off to another family, and she escaped, and she was like, "Nah, dog, I ain't doing that, right? I have the vow of chastity. I gotta be awesome." And then at the age of 16, she starts hearing the voices again, right? And they tell her that she needs to go off and save France, right? They're like, you need to get Charles, the true king of France, crowned the king of France yet again, right? So to give you some backstory, there's all this crazy stuff going on. I mean, 100-year-long war is going to have some crazy stuff, right? So to give you some backstory in this 100-year-long war with all this ridiculousness happening, is that what had happened was one of the kings of France during this time period, Charles VI, was mentally insane, right? He thought he was made out of glass. He had killed a couple of his bodyguards because he thought they were trying to kill him. He apparently got set on fire at one of his parties one time. So Charles VI was having a rough time. Well, the English decided to force Charles VI to let one of his daughters marry the English king, right? Or the up-and-coming English king, whose name was Henry V, right? There's actually a movie about him on Netflix called The King, right? It's got Timothy Chalamet in it. So I know all of y'all are like, oh, I should go watch that. Now, so it's wildly historically inaccurate, but don't get me started. So Charles VI, the crazy king, gets his daughter married off to this King Henry V, and so Henry V basically by proxy is looking to try and take over, or he wants to produce an heir, which would be Henry VI, who would take over as the new king of France because he's now more directly related to the lineage. Charles VI, the crazy king, disinherits his son, Charles, right? Charles would be Charles VII. And so Charles VII is on the run, and he's trying to win this war so he can be crowned king of France, right? So basically the voices of these saints are telling Joan to go install Charles the prince as Charles VII, the rightful king of France, right? And so she's like, how am I supposed to do that, though? I have to get to Reims, which is beyond the city of Orleans, right? Orleans, Orleans, yeah. Oh, I don't know, the one that New Orleans is named after. I have to get past that city to get him to Reims. And the voices of God say, you will lead an army past that area. So she's like, okay, what's up? She cuts her hair short, and then she actually dresses like a man and goes to see a local magistrate. Well, this is the story's a little bit out of order. She actually went to a local magistrate in an armory and tried to get a horse and some stuff, and then the guy was like, no, you're a woman, I'm not giving you this stuff. She went back to the villagers and talked to them. The villagers then gave her a horse and some stuff and men's traveling clothes, and then made her got her to cut her hair so she could be safe on this journey because they didn't want her to get assaulted, right? And also because men's traveling clothes tie at the sides, so they're very hard to rip, right? So now they didn't these villagers listened to her, and she goes all the way to where Charles is living at the time as just the prince or the Dauphin of France, and Charles gets convinced by her that she has heard the voices of God, right? So we don't know exactly what the order of operations were, but when she got to Charles, she sat him down and was like, I have heard God. He told me that I am supposed to lead an army to Orleans and that I'm supposed to take it over for you and help you get reinstalled as the French king, right? Well, he says, okay, let's make sure she's not a witch, right? So people check her, body and stuff like that to see if she's a witch. She passes those tests. And then there's a couple of other things that she goes through, but she convinces Charles that she is not, or that she's not a perpetrator or trying to or sent by the devil, right? And so he gives her an army, and he gives her a horse, and he gives her armor that apparently is so clean and fresh that it looks white from a distance, right? So Charles gives her an army, and Joan has a massive victory in Orleans, right? She shows up at the city of Orleans while they're actually being attacked on all sides, and they're actually about to starve because the English are actually all around them. And so she actually sneaks in, brings food and supplies, but then even the generals that are in charge of Orleans at the time don't want to listen to her because she's a woman, right? And she's like, okay, you want to play that game? Fine. So she punks out the English and then ends up amassing her own small military and attacks the English directly against the advisement of these generals and ends up winning this massive victory. During this battle where she actually took Orleans from the English, she actually stepped on a British caltrop, which is a big barb thing that's meant to be stepped on to go through an enemy's foot. It went all the way through her foot. She got shot in the shoulder with an arrow, but she pulled both of them out and then kept fighting. What a boss. And she's doing all this in white armor, waving a banner and And so she wins this massive victory at the Battle of Orleans, right? And after winning at the Battle of Orleans, she takes Charles up to Reims where he would be crowned king of France, right? Mainly due to the fact that nobody wants to listen to this 9-month-old English guy that's on the throne. But unfortunately, though, what ends up happening after Charles gets crowned king of France, he goes, thanks, Joan, appreciate it. You can leave now. And then he doesn't give her a new mission or anything like that. So what she decides to do is she wants to take her army and she wants to go take Paris, right? The capital city in northern France. She wants to liberate Paris from English control and Burgundian control. She wants to take it back, Pierre, and she wants to become this like awesome person. Well, what happened was she got snitched on, and outside of Paris, she actually got captured when she was trying to destroy some supply depots, right? She got captured by the Burgundians, and then they sold her to the English, right? They sold her to the English, and immediately when the English take her, they accuse her of witchcraft, right? And they put her on trial with 70 different charges in front of what? Look at this Inquisition right here, okay? In front of these inquisitors, right? These priests begin to accuse her of heresy and witchcraft and cross-dressing, which apparently in the Old Testament somewhere it says that women are not supposed to wear men's clothes. And then, like, in this whole thing, they keep telling her, hey, if you say that you didn't hear the voice of God, we will let you live. Now, granted, it'll be in prison for the rest of your life, but we'll let you live, and we won't, like, put you on trial, we won't burn you at the stake, we won't do any of that stuff, right? So, like, 70 different charges, and the entire time Joan says, no, I will not defy my God. I will not say I did not hear him in the saints, because I did, and that is why I had that massive victory at Orleans, right? Well, what ended up happening, though, is she was held captive for over a year, right? And she still kept refusing to say that she didn't hear God. One time, apparently in the middle of the night, they woke her up and pulled her out onto a gallows. And a gallows is where they come, like, they bring you up to have your head cut off, right? And it's like in the middle of the night, it's pitch black. There's a man standing there with an axe, and he says, if you admit to not hearing God right now, then we will let you live. And if you don't, we're going to cut your head off, right? And she said, okay, fine, I didn't hear him, right? She actually said she didn't hear him and signed a document saying she never heard God due to the fact that she was scared, right? But then a couple months goes by, she cuts her hair, she cross-dresses again, she's in her cell, and she's like, I did hear God, what's up, right? And she actually cross-dressed again, and after being told not to, and she got burned at the stake at the age of 19, right? But basically, in a nutshell, though, she is considered to be one of the most famous figures from the Middle Ages, and there are actually 4 statues of her in, like, throughout the world. One is in Philadelphia, one's in France, I don't know where the other one is, but then one of them's in New Orleans. One of the only 4 statues of her is in New Orleans. It's down near the French Market, right? And so she would be burned at the stake at the age of 19, right? For her, like, beliefs and for her saying that she did hear God and her refusal to give that up, right? She would be canonized by Pope Benedict XV in 1920 as the patron saint of France. France was losing every battle during the 100 Years' War until she came along on the scene and turned the tides of the entire thing. But that is the 100 Years' War, right? That is Joan of Arc, and we'll talk about the Black Death in our next class. See y'all soon.